Picture a 1950s grocery store aisle. The post-war economic boom is, it's in full swing, and a food company named Betty Crocker has just released what they assume is this absolute marvel of modern food engineering.
Right, the instant cake mix.
Exactly, the instant cake mix. It was pitched as a powdered miracle in a box. I mean, all the consumer had to do was add water, stir, and bake. It was basically the ultimate frictionless convenience, but there was this massive, completely unforeseen problem.
It totally flopped.
It flopped. The mix just sat on the shelves gathering dust.
And the executives were completely baffled by this because, I mean, from an engineering and a supply chain perspective, they had optimized the process perfectly. But they fundamentally misunderstood the psychology of the person actually standing in the kitchen.
Which was mostly housewives at the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by making the cake mix completely effortless, they'd accidentally removed the baker's sense of pride. Like their sense of ownership, the consumers felt undervalued, and they actually felt a genuine sense of guilt presenting a water-only cake to their families.
Like they were deceiving them or taking the easy way out.
Yeah, exactly like that.
So Betty Crocker brings in a team of psychologists to figure out why no one wants this magic powder. And they came up with this counterintuitive solution that literally changed the food industry forever. They told the company to require the consumer to add a fresh egg.
Which sounds crazy.
Right. Think about that. They intentionally made the product harder to use. But that tiny infusion of manual labor transformed the baker from, a passive recipient into an active creator.
Suddenly it wasn't Betty Crocker's cake anymore. It was their cake.
Exactly. And sales absolutely skyrocketed.
Because that simple trick with the egg exposed a really dangerous reality about the human brain. Make something too easy, and we inherently devalue it.
Welcome to our deep dive on exactly that, because we are looking at a really rich stack of sources today that explore this phenomenon, starting from foundational 2011 consumer psychology studies and then moving through evolutionary anthropology from the University of St. Andrews.
And we're also landing on a very recent 2026 MIT Sloan report about the future of enterprise artificial intelligence.
Yeah, because that cake mix is really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, if you have ever refused to throw away a wobbly, leaning bookshelf just because you put it together yourself, you are living this right now. It's called the IKEA Effect.
Which is this incredibly powerful cognitive bias where we disproportionately overvalue things that we partially create ourselves.
Right. So our mission today is to tear into these sources and figure out the neurobiology behind this bias. We want to understand why you value what you do, how modern software companies are basically engineering your loyalty with controlled friction, and why this might be the exact reason your company is currently refusing to fix its broken AI strategy.
To really get to the bottom of this, though, we need to look at how this bias was first quantified. Back in 2011, researchers Michael Norton, Daniel Moshon, and Dan O'Reilly ran a series of experiments that totally upended standard economic theory. Well, traditional economics assumes that labor is a disutility, like it's a cost. If you have to burn energy and time to acquire something, you should theoretically want to pay less money for it.
That makes sense. I wouldn't want to pay full price if I have to do half the work.
Exactly. But these researchers found the complete inverse. They had participants assemble utilitarians, standard IKEA storage boxes, just plain cardboard and plastic. Afterwards, they asked the participants to bid on their own boxes.
And what happened?
The builders were willing to pay 63% more to keep the box than a control group who were just handed the exact same boxes already assembled.
63% more for a plain cardboard box. That is wild.
It really is.
But, okay, that's a utilitarian task, right? A
Yeah.
box is a box. What happens when the task requires actual skill? Because looking at the sources, when they moved to hedonic, creative tasks, the results got completely unhinged.
Oh, they absolutely did. The researchers had participants fold origami cranes. Now, origami is difficult. It takes precision. And the participants were amateurs, so their paper cranes were wonky, asymmetrical, and just generally terrible.
I can only imagine.
But when asked to value them, the builders priced their amateurish creations a staggering 460% higher than non-builders did.
Wait. They thought their literal trash was expert level.
Essentially, yes. They expected the rest of the world to pay premium prices for their folded paper. And this is the core mechanism of the IKEA effect. It's rooted in a concept called effort justification.
Effort justification. Break that down for us.
So when you invest significant time and sweat into a task, you experience severe cognitive dissonance if the outcome is mediocre.
Hmm.
Your brain simply refuses to admit, I just spent 2 hours struggling with this manual, my fingers hurt, and the result is garbage.
Right. Nobody wants to feel like they wasted their time.
Exactly. So to resolve that psychological pain, your brain alters its perception of the physical object. It basically inflates the object's worth.
Okay, let's unpack the neurochemistry here for a second, because the sources mention this frustration-dopamine loop and reward prediction error.
Yes, that's a crucial part of it.
It sounds exactly like a video game. Like, if a boss fight in a game is way too easy, the loot you get at the end feels completely worthless. You don't even bother equipping it.
Exactly.
But if you die 15 times and you have to memorize the attack patterns and you finally beat the boss by the skin of your teeth, the dopamine hit is massive.
That is a perfect parallel.
Oh.
The brain is constantly calculating the delta, like the difference between the expected struggle and the actual reward.
See.
So the frustration of a missing screw or confusing diagram or a difficult video game boss acts as a neurological setup. When you finally overcome that obstacle, your brain registers a reward prediction error.
Meaning it feels better than it actually is.
Basically, yes.
Okay.
The outcome feels exponentially better than expected relative to the intense struggle you just endured. You get this flood of dopamine that binds your sense of satisfaction directly to the object itself.
Oh, wait, let me challenge that for a second. The video game, the origami, the IKEA box, they all involve actual effort, right? Like sweat equity.
Sure.
But I'm looking at this 2008 study in the Stack by Wolf, Arks, and Mohana, and they claim this effect happens with almost no effort at all.
Yes, the mug study.
Right. They ran an auction where bidders just physically held a plain coffee mug. One group held it for 10 seconds, the other group held it for 30 seconds, and the people who held it for 30 seconds bid significantly higher amounts of money for it.
Yep, they did.
Holding a mug for half a minute isn't labor. That completely contradicts the whole sweat equity premise, doesn't it?
It seems like a contradiction, yeah, but it actually reveals how stealthy this bias really is. The researchers call this pseudo-endowment.
Pseudo-endowment.
Right? The physical contact alone begins to shift the object in your mind from an external commodity into an extension of your own identity. The brain doesn't strictly require physical exhaustion to trigger the effect. It just requires a sense of agency over the object.
Just from touching it.
Just from touching it. And it gets even more abstract than that. Modern research highlights a phenomenon called haptic imagery.
Okay, what is haptic imagery?
Imagine you are shopping online for a pair of sneakers. You click on a 3D model, you rotate it, maybe you swap out the colors of the laces, you zoom in on the tread.
Yeah, pretty standard online shopping stuff.
Right, but you haven't built anything physical. You haven't even touched the shoe. But your brain registers that digital manipulation as labor. The mere act of controlling the object's orientation on a screen triggers that exact same sense of perceived ownership.
Wow, that is slightly terrifying. I mean, if just rotating a digital picture or holding a mug for 20 extra seconds can completely rewire our valuation of an object, this cannot just be some modern quirk.
No, not at all.
This has to be deeply, deeply ingrained in our biology. But honestly, it feels like a massive evolutionary flaw. Wouldn't natural selection weed out early humans who preferred their own terrible, wobbly homemade spears over perfectly balanced spears they found lying around?
You would definitely think so, but evolutionary biology suggests the exact opposite. To understand why, we have to look at the work of researchers Leyland and Brown and their concept of niche construction.
Niche construction.
Yeah. Standard evolutionary theory usually tells a very passive story, like there is an environment, it acts as a harsh filter, and organisms simply mutate and adapt to survive it.
Right, survival of the fittest.
But niche construction theory argues that certain organisms actively build and regulate their environments to suit themselves.
Oh, like a beaver building a dam to change the flow of a river, or chimpanzees weaving complex nests.
Exactly. And humans are the ultimate niche constructors. Building satisfies a fundamental human psychological need called affectance.
Affectance.
Yes, affectance is our deep-seated biological drive for competence and control over our surroundings. It's the need to impose order on chaos. When you assemble a product or build a shelter or craft a tool, you are exercising affectance.
You are proving to your nervous system that you can manipulate a hostile world to your advantage.
Spot.
So we aren't just passively waiting for evolution to change us. We are actively forcing the world to adapt to our DIY projects.
We are, and this actively challenges a very popular idea in evolutionary psychology known as the adaptive lag hypothesis.
Oh, right. That's the idea you often hear in pop science, that humans are essentially walking around a high-tech modern world with outdated Stone Age brains.
Exactly. Leyland and Brown argue that's a mischaracterization. They say humans use cultural niche construction to buffer that lag. When we create a problem with our environment, we don't wait for our biology to slowly catch up. We build a new cultural or technological solution to fix it.
But the sources highlight that sometimes our cultural solutions aren't enough, and our biology literally does change to catch up to our DIY projects, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because the dairy farming example in the research is just fascinating. I mean, originally, human adults could not digest lactose. But we invented the cultural practice of domesticating animals and hoarding their milk. We built a new agricultural environment.
Right. We culturally constructed that niche.
And because we built it, it created a brand new natural selection pressure. So over generations, the genetic mutation for lactose tolerance evolved and spread. We culturally built a new food source, and our biology physically adapted to digest it.
It's incredible. And if we look deeper into the sources, there's a much more intense example of this from West Africa, involving Kwa-speaking yam cultivators.
Oh, I read this part. This is wild.
It really is. These agriculturalists began clearing dense tropical forests to plant yams. This cultural building, this niche construction, removed the tree canopy and inadvertently increased the amount of standing water in the area.
Let me guess. Standing water means mosquitoes.
Millions of them. That standing water became the perfect breeding ground for malaria-carrying mosquitoes. By building their farms, they inadvertently engineered a localized malaria epidemic.
Wow.
And because they couldn't culturally engineer their way out of the disease at the time, natural selection took over. This self-inflicted environmental change directly led to the natural selection of the sickle cell S allele in that specific population.
Because carrying one copy of that gene offers significant protection against malaria.
Precisely.
Okay, wait. Let's connect the dots here. How does a genetic mutation for malaria resistance in yam farmers connect to me overvaluing an ugly origami crane?
It's the biological bridge. The drive to alter our environment, to farm, to build, to construct, is our species' primary survival mechanism.
Hmm.
It is so essential that our brain must heavily reward us chemically for doing it.
Ah, I see.
That affectance, that dopamine hit, is the reward for taking control of the environment. The cognitive bias, the IKEA effect, is just a psychological byproduct of that survival imperative. Our brains are wired to fall blindly in love with our own niche construction because historically building things is what kept us alive.
Even if the thing we built was flawed.
Exactly.
So we are chemically rewarded for building our own leaky houses. Which, I mean, it makes sense for survival, but that brings us to the dark side of this bias. What happens when the house really is falling apart, but we are too drugged on our own dopamine to notice?
That is the big question.
Because looking at the sources, this causes massive destruction in the modern corporate world.
Oh, it causes absolute havoc. In corporate management, this dark side manifests as the not invented here or NIH syndrome. Because of the IKEA effect, managers and executives consistently overvalue their own internal research and development over vastly superior external ideas.
Just because they didn't make it.
Right. They simply lack the labor equity in the outside solutions.
The classic example the sources cite is Sony in the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, Sony owned portable music. The Walkman was iconic. But when digital music arrived, Sony flat out refused to make their digital players compatible with the massively popular MP3 format.
Which was a catastrophic mistake.
Yeah. And why? Because Sony didn't invent the MP3. They spent all their time and effort building their own proprietary audio formats.
They were completely blinded by their own labor. They looked at the MP3, which the entire world was adopting, and they rejected it just because they didn't have any sweat equity in it.
They were treating their proprietary code with the same blind affection a parent has for a toddler's macaroni art.
That is a great way to put it.
And because they couldn't let go of the house they built, they lost the entire digital music market to Apple and the iPod. But what really strikes me here is that this blindness isn't limited to physical products or corporate software.
No, it goes much deeper.
Right. The sources outline something called the epistemic IKEA effect. This is the bias applied to ideas.
And honestly, this might be the most crucial concept for understanding our modern culture. When someone decides to, quote-unquote, do their own research, when they spend late nights scouring fringe forums, connecting disparate dots, and assembling a highly customized conspiracy theory, They're investing massive amounts of cognitive labor.
They are mentally assembling the IKEA box.
Precisely. And because they did the heavy lifting of building that worldview themselves, they value it exponentially more than expert consensus.
So a scientist handing them a peer-reviewed fact is like Betty Crocker handing them the water-only cake mix.
Exactly. It requires no effort from them, so they reject it out of hand.
So people are treating their Google searches like origami cranes. They fold together this lopsided, factually incorrect theory, but because they did the folding, they think it's expert-level analysis.
Sadly. Yeah.
And that perfectly explains why it is almost impossible to defeat a conspiracy theory with simple facts. You aren't just asking someone to accept a new piece of information. You are demanding that they burn down their own intellectual creation.
Right, you're telling them their hard work was completely worthless.
And human psychology will fiercely defend against that realization.
We will ignore glaring, catastrophic flaws in our creations just to protect our ego and our sense of effectiveness. Which actually brings us to the most complex, expensive, and potentially dangerous leaky house we are building right now in 2026.
Our enterprise artificial intelligence infrastructure.
Exactly.
This is where we really need to dig into the MIT Sloan 2026 report because the landscape has shifted violently.
It has.
The initial AI hype bubble, which the report explicitly compares to the dot-com crash of the early 2000s, is deflating. I mean, a few years ago, we were promised agentic AI.
Right, the autonomous agents.
Yeah, these were supposed to be digital agents that would complete complex business tasks entirely on their own while we just sit back and watch. But they are facing a brutal reality check. In the real world, these agents are still suffering from ongoing hallucinations, they're making critical logic errors, and they keep falling victim to prompt injection hacks.
Yet, despite all these massive flaws, major corporations are not abandoning them.
Why is that?
Well, the MIT report pinpoints exactly why. The IKEA effect has fully migrated into the digital realm. The 2026 enterprise landscape has transitioned away from simple prompt engineering, where you just ask a chatbot a question and get an answer. It has moved into process engineering.
Meaning what, exactly, for the average user?
It means users aren't just typing prompts anymore. They are spending weeks, sometimes months, linking different AI models together, connecting them to internal vector databases, tweaking parameters, and building highly customized digital avatars and multi-step workflows.
They are deeply involved in the creation process.
Very deeply.
So they are putting sweat equity into the code, they are digitally sanding the wood and tightening the screws.
Yes. And because of the massive human capital and emotional labor invested in setting up these really fragile systems, a digital IKEA effect takes hold.
That makes total sense.
The MIT Sloan report notes this really bizarre trend. Corporate leaders are actively hesitant to decommission their hallucinating, error-prone internal AI agents.
Even when better options exist.
Even when standardized, highly reliable third-party enterprise resources become available, leaders won't make the switch. They are emotionally locked into the flawed spaghetti code they built themselves.
It is the Sony MP3 problem all over again, but this time with neural networks.
Exactly. It's the ultimate sunk cost fallacy, heavily disguised as technological innovation.
But here is the thing. The smart software companies out there, like the ones actually building the tools that these executives are playing with, they know exactly what they're doing, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They are purposefully designing software to trigger this bias, using what researchers call the Goldilocks zone of effort.
The Goldilocks zone of effort, that's the sweet spot of controlled friction, right?
Right. Software developers have realized that if a platform is too hard to use, users just rage quit.
Sure.
But if it's a one-click magic button, users feel zero ownership and they'll abandon the platform for a competitor tomorrow. So, the successful platforms of 2026 use adaptive complexity to strike the perfect balance.
Adaptive complexity, ground that for me. What does that actually look like for the user?
Think of a platform like IKEA Creative's AI Room Designer. The software does all the heavy, computationally frustrating math. It handles the spatial mapping of your room, the complex 3D rendering, the lighting physics.
It does the stuff that makes you want to throw your laptop out a window.
Exactly. It completely removes the bad friction. But it leaves the meaningful aesthetic choices entirely up to you.
Oh.
You choose the specific sofa, you drag and drop the rug into place, you tweak the color palette. By doing this, the software is literally choreographing your neurotransmitters.
That is wild.
It lowers your norepinephrine to reduce your stress, so you don't quit.
Yeah.
But it gives you just enough agency to trigger dopamine when you finalize the layout, and a hit of serotonin when you step back to admire it. You feel a profound sense of authorship over a room design that an algorithm actually built 90% of.
They gave you the kick mix, but they made sure you got to crack the egg.
Perfectly said.
It is brilliantly manipulative. And honestly, it brings us to the absolute core mission of this deep dive. You, the listener, need to recognize these hardwired biases so you can make them work for you instead of against you.
Because the IKEA effect is governing your life right now.
It really is. It dictates the cheap, fast furniture you choose to spend hours repairing instead of throwing away, which, ironically, is a surprising win for global sustainability. It governs the mutual effort, the arguments, and the compromises that make your romantic relationships feel valuable and enduring.
And it is absolutely dictating the enterprise AI tools you are championing at your job.
So how do you protect yourself from the dark side of this bias? How do you know if your project is a masterpiece or a leaky house?
Well, the research strongly suggests implementing a second opinion audit.
A second opinion audit.
Yeah, whether you are evaluating a DIY home renovation or a marketing strategy you just devised or a complex AI workflow you just spent 3 weeks coding, you must ask an unbiased third party to evaluate it.
Because they haven't invested the late night.
Exactly. They don't have the emotional labor equity. They can look at your project and see the lopsided bookshelf clearly, entirely unclouded by the memory of your effort.
You have to ruthlessly separate the value of the final outcome from the pain of the process. But before we wrap this up, we want to leave you with one final fascinating application of this bias from the Ashtiani study on financial markets.
This is a really great one.
Because while we've talked a lot about the dangers of this bias, it turns out the IKEA effect might actually be the key to saving your retirement.
The Ashtiani study looked at how retail investors behave during severe market crashes. And they found that when investors are allowed to actively select their own risky investments, like when they are given the tools to essentially assemble their own portfolio, while the platform ensures they maintain safe diversification, they behave radically differently than people who are just handed a pre-made, optimized portfolio by a financial advisor.
The numbers in the study are staggering. When the market crashed, 31% of the people with the pre-made, professionally advised portfolios panicked and sold off their risky assets. They jumped ship.
But of the people who built their own portfolios,
Only 10% panic sold. Because they put the effort into selecting the assets themselves, they created a deep psychological commitment to those choices. Their labor literally armored them against financial panic.
it's incredible.
Which leaves us with a really important question. If adding a little friction and building your own portfolio stops you from panic selling, what happens as we continue to automate every single aspect of our lives, from our savings to our emails to our creative work? Are we engineering our own future panics by removing the IKEA effect?
It's something we all need to be thinking about.
As you go about your week, look at the ultra-convenient, frictionless systems in your life. Ask yourself, where is your life begging for you to just crack a fresh egg into the mix? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep questioning the things you build, and we will catch you next time.